Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining the Port Community Session for March. We're really excited to have you here. We have some great guests here today who are going to be sharing their experience building an internal developer portal and using Port in general, and really talking about how they're thinking about developer experience. So we're really excited to have Travis and Mark with us today. I'll introduce them here in just a second. We'll give people a minute or two to get connected to today's session, and then we will get started. Thanks, everyone. All right. Thanks again, everyone, for joining. It looks like we have sort of hit a good steady state in terms of joiners. I want to thank everybody again for joining us, and I want to introduce our special guests here in just a minute. My name is Jim Armstrong, so I'm in product marketing here at Port. This is our community session. We do these every month on the fourth week of each month, where we provide the sort of latest and greatest in terms of Port features and capabilities, and we'll cover those today. But we also have very special guests with us here today who are going to present their experience and share a bit about how they go about building a portal and building great developer experiences for their company, SPS Commerce. We have Travis and Mark here with us. Gents, you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Absolutely. Thanks, Jim. Excited to be able to join the call today and hang out a little bit and talk developer portal. My name is Travis, and I work as a distinguished engineer at SPS Commerce, where I'm not really focused on necessarily what the products we're building are, but how we build the products and the efficiency and the productivity and the overall DevX, which is really exciting position to be in.
Yeah, thanks for having us. And my name is Mark DeBeer. So I'm the lead software engineer on our developer productivity engineering team. And I've been with SPS for a little over a decade now, and I've worked on a number of different product and delivery teams. And I transitioned to the DPE team about 2 years ago. And so the DPE team are the technical owners of our developer portal, and majority of my focus is on the architecture side of things.
Fantastic. We're really excited. Travis and Mark are going to share a good bit of their experience today. They are going to be traveling the world later this year, sharing their experiences. So this is kind of their kickoff of their world tour as well. So we're excited to have them here for that. Encourage people to ask questions along the way, all throughout the session. You can ask questions about the product capabilities that I'll talk about, and certainly ask questions of Travis and Mark as we go through. You can use the Zoom Q&A panel to do that. There's also a chat panel, but we encourage you to ask questions. That's what this session and these sessions each month are really about, as a way to interact with each other. Without further ado, as I mentioned, I'm going to cover the features and new things important. Then we'll go to the SPS team to cover their pieces. So we had a number of new features this month that have been added to Port. I'll show you a few of these today in our live environment. We've done a lot in terms of customization, and we've had a big focus in terms of helping our customers make Port feel more like it's your own true custom portal. One of those is making it look like it's your true custom portal, and being able to customize the branding and the look and feel of it. And then also, as we talk about developer experience and streamlining things, it's important that that even the pages and items within Port fit an end user's view of the world and how they like to get things done. So we've added some capabilities in terms of delegating control of those pages out to end users, and I'll show you a couple of those features today. We also have added the ability to run surveys inside of Port, which is a great way to gather developer feedback and understand what are the biggest pain points and what are the bottlenecks and what kind of problems do you need to solve if you're in the platform engineering world and the developer experience world, and trying to, like Travis and Mark mentioned, figure out how you release software and the best ways to do that and streamlining that. So surveys play a huge part in that. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on surveys today. I'll chat through them and I'll show you, a couple of examples. But we're going to spend a lot of time on surveys next month. There's some additional capabilities that are coming between now and next month. And so we've got a big package, of updates coming in the next month as well. But they are available for folks to start using today. We also added some new integration capabilities. So we have a new integration that uses a company called Airbyte, as well as S3 buckets and webhooks. And essentially Airbyte can integrate with, it seems like, almost anything in the world these days. And so if you have a system, or like Google Drive is a great example. If you want to get Google Docs into port, you can use Airbyte to get them, to sort of create that pipeline. But they have all kinds of integrations, and we'll kind of chat through that a little bit. And there's all kinds of other things that have happened as well. We've got some Terraform and Pulumi updates. One of the big ones, this was a request, actually a question that came up, I think, in the January session. Somebody had asked about using Terraform to manage the system blueprints in port. That capability is now available, and as well as managing some of the other features, and then some Azure updates as well. We'll go as far into the details on those, but we'll touch on some of these others. So the logo customization in port, again, it's a small-ish thing in terms of feature, but it's a big thing in terms of making port feel like home, feel like yours, and feel familiar to your teams and the people that you're building the developer portal for. And the ability to just take out the port logo and put in your own logo and your own team name or company name or organization name or whatever you want to make it be is a big part of that. So we've added that capability. It's all self-service. You can do this in a couple of clicks. I'll show you here in just in a second in the live demo environment. But again, you have total control over that and what you want those logos to look like. They will work in light and dark mode. So really nice capability there. It's one of those, again, it's one of those small things. Like dark mode is a small-ish thing, but also really important to a lot of people for various reasons that are great. The other piece that I mentioned too is the ability to kind of delegate, not only delegating ownership of a page, but you're delegating the ability for your end users to customize pages inside of port. Again, a lot of this is important for workflow, for how people want to be able to see things, and sort of manage things, and also to kind of take some of the burden off of you if you're a platform engineer and you have tens or hundreds of teams that are out there who may each have their own way of doing things. You don't have to set all these individual pages up yourself. You can delegate those out to the team so that they can create their own views within the software catalog or within dashboards in port. So great feature, again, sort of falling into that realm of customization and building your workflows. Surveys, as I mentioned, I'll show you this. I'll show you all three of these things live in port, but the surveys, as we mentioned as well, are now available inside of port. We actually have several. There's a link at the top of this. We'll share all this information after the session too, but it's available in our docs and our guides. There are a number of surveys templates that are ready to go. So if you want to run a developer experience survey, you can do that. There's an example of that there. If you want to, there's, I think, eight-ish different survey templates that are there, but you can create any kind of survey that you want to create inside of port. We also can have multiple versions of a survey. So you can think of using versions to run, maybe a quarterly survey, and you want to compare results from one quarter to the next, or every 6 months or things like that, and sort of see how answers and results change over time, and sort of track results that way. So nice capabilities there. All handled via self-service actions, and it's really, it's a really great feature. It's something that loads of our customers had requested, and we still have far more planned on it. And so we'd love for people to get in there and start kicking the tires and share your ideas with us in terms of where you want to see surveys go next with port as well. I'll show you those in the live environment here in just a few minutes. And then the other feature that I mentioned too is this ability to integrate. I think I said 500 data sources on the previous slide. I just looked this morning. Now they say 550 data sources on the Airbyte side of things. But they can integrate with all kinds of different tools. Some of these aren't things that you might naturally think of as part of the developer experience or how you deliver software, but a lot of them do tie in interesting ways. We have loads of people who store things in Google Docs or spreadsheets or other places that you might want to ingest into Port for various reasons, and all kinds of other sources as well. And so this is a great way to start bringing that data into Port. You don't have to build, each integration yourself. If you can set up the S3 and the webhooks, which are pretty simple, then you can get these integrations pretty quickly. Again, that's via a company called Airbyte. You can go to airbyte.com and you can see all the different integrations that they already have built within Airbyte. So a great and simple way to start getting data in. Another one that's in early access, we'd love for people to to start using it and see what you do with it. All right, I am going to flip over here to the demo environment just to show a couple of things. So, if you didn't attend last month, we did have this feature to change the logo that came out right about the time we did the community session last month. And so we chatted through it very quickly, but I'll just show you here. You can see in the top left that I've customized the logo and the name on my portal. Very simple to do. If you go into the builder view and go to organization settings, you can change the title that appears here, and then you can supply your URL to your logo, and you can see it works in preview it in both light and dark mode to see how that will look in your site. Very simple, but very nice thing to be able to do. We also talked about customizing the pages in the catalog. So here's an example of a catalog page, right? This is just default, everything sort of dumped in here at once. In past months, we've talked about the ability to kind of drag things around in the panel, and I could save this if I want, which would save it for all other users. But if I want to delegate that responsibility to others, I can come into the permissions for the page, and I can select other users and other teams who could then take control and be able to really customize these pages. Just a note too, as we chatted about, and this was something we talked about last month, users and teams here are completely up to you and completely flexible. You can of course pull in, via sources like your Okta tools and authentication tools, users and teams, but you may define, tribes or domains, or who knows, there's all kinds of ways you could sort of create a team or have a team concept within your company that you can model in Port, and those could be the teams that you also delegate access to for pages, and same with users. So very flexible in terms of how you decide which teams, and then giving teams access to customize things like these pages inside of Port. Okay, let's see. Surveys was the other thing. That's what it was. All right, so surveys. I've got in this demo environment, I've got my surveys set up here already. And you can see where I've got survey respondents coming in, as well as some other metrics. But the way that a survey runs is just via self-service action here. We can have this kick off in Port. You can see we've got a trigger that will send Slack notifications to tell people that there's a survey that they need to take action on as well, so that they get notified outside of Port. I will say the limitation today is that surveys are run inside of Port, so somebody would need to log into Port to run a survey. We have some ideas there, and ultimately that's something that we'll continue to work on. But for this version, the surveys are run inside of Port. But we can, this survey can be totally customized. You can create whatever questions you want and supply the values for those questions. And, as you can imagine, I won't walk through the whole thing, but fill out the survey, hit next, and submit it. And that will then send the results on back to Port, and, have this version of the survey with my results stored in it. And we can, of course, collect those survey results. and aggregate them. So we can see and create scorecards and dashboards from those survey results. We can see, again, this is a great way to start to explore. A lot of people come to Port and they're not real sure what to build first or what to build second or third, and what is the big focus that they should have. And surveys is a great way to start exploring that, to ask the users who you want to be logging in here and doing things. What are the problems they have, and how can potentially we use something like Port to solve those problems? And so surveys is a great way to sort of collect that feedback. You can collect feedback on the portal itself, and how the look and feel of it is and how that goes. But I think it's great for collecting information about everybody's day-to-day life and where they see bottlenecks and problems along the way that maybe aren't as obvious to folks who don't sort of live in that world every day. And that can, of course, help you determine what to build in Port. And then, through the metrics capture we have, you can see the trends change over time, and repeated surveys. Hopefully you see responses change and certain things improve, and you identify the next bottleneck and go ahead and solve it. But that's what I'll say about surveys. Again, we're going to do more on surveys next month, so we'll spend a little bit more time on it there. As I mentioned in the guides for Port, we have several survey examples that are available. I'll just try and pull those up real quick. And let's see. Oh, so in guides, you can go to surveys, create surveys in your portal, and there are some examples, I believe, here. Yep. So there's developer experience. You can, of course, create custom surveys, incident and on-call experience, milestone and project experience, new hire onboarding, and several sort of subcategories here. So a great place to sort of start, get a feel for how surveys work, and of course you can take it from there and customize it and make it all your own. But I think that is all I will say for now on the Port side. What I want to do is hand things over to Travis and Mark and let you guys take things away.
Awesome. Thanks, Jim. I'll just do the obligatory. You can see my screen now. Everything should be shared there. We're good to go. If you can't, I think, Jim, there's a tab at the top.
Yeah, it should be a tab at the top.
Awesome.
If you're on the webinar tab, then there should be one that says Travis Gosselin's screen, and you should be able to just click that and be with us. Looks
fantastic.
Good.
Great. Well, yeah, thanks so much for walking us through. We're always excited each month to see what new features are coming out in Port. That's one of the advantages of being on a SaaS offering and just being able to kind of get that regular value that's delivered to us. And so we've been definitely a big fan of that and some of the recent features that have been released. And today, Mark and I wanted to explore all about our journey of how we built our developer portal. Some of the little tidbits, some of the ideas, some of the architectural considerations, some of how we started building an internal developer portal for the world's retail network. And for us, a lot of this is focused on the idea of empowerment and how we can better empower and engage our engineers. And this quote from Satya Nadella, I think, is really helpful in kind of clarifying the importance of empowerment and how that affects innovation in the organization. And that said, empowerment is key to accelerating innovation in any team. So as we get started today, I want to share a little bit about this idea of developer experience in SPS Commerce, because Mark and I don't necessarily focus specifically on the products that we build, but we are engaging with our engineers specifically on how they build them, which, as you can understand, is pretty interconnected. You probably haven't heard of SPS Commerce before, and that's because we're a business-to-business organization where we connect suppliers and retailers together in the world's largest retail network, where we interoperate documents for things like purchase orders and invoices across this entire supply chain network throughout the world. About 50,000 plus customers in our network. It is the world's largest. We're about a 3,000 person organization, just to give you an idea of size. We're about 700 people in our technology department. We have about 2,400 deployable units, or you might relate that to your service catalog. So we have about 2,400 items active in our service catalog today. And about 560 of those are APIs, just to give you an idea of the types of things we're deploying into there. And our journey is centered around this idea that we're not a FANG organization. We don't have the same level of resources out there that many of the large enterprises do. And so where is SPS positioned? Well, for us, it's been an incredible growth journey over the past few years where we've just increased our gross revenue quite rapidly, and we've had rapid expanding of our teams. And so right now we sit at about $600 million in gross revenue for SPS Commerce. So that kind of positions us somewhere between medium and large. In a lot of cases, we're still maturing and figuring out, how to act as an organization that size. And this is part of our maturity process in that as well, as we've onboarded and worked through developer experience and developer productivity and our internal developer portal. Just to give you an idea, we're actually pretty lean on our productivity count and our head count. And so we run at about 8% of all of our technology teams and individual resources are dedicated to productivity. And so that's pretty low if you're familiar with some of those stats. We see other organizations, they've been pretty vocal about it, like Etsy claiming like a 20% is kind of the healthy range. And so we had some work to do, some business cases to make, and we had to figure out really how to effectively define this problem with this minimum set of individuals and resources that we could tackle it with.
All right. So before we began looking into developer portals, we wanted to take time and just define the problem that we were trying to solve. So we felt like I think many other organizations feel that our developer experience can suffer from disjointed tools and complex workflows, which can slow productivity and increase our risk of errors. So this is also compounded by decentralization and tedious setup processes, which can lead to inconsistent practices and then further frustration. So to break it down a little bit for you, into the issues that we wanted to look at was that we've got about 20 or more development tools, and we have plans to develop plans to develop or adopt even more tools. So we've got a lot of tool sprawl going on. We also had no shared central context for seeing the complete current state of application. And so like Travis said, we have about around 2,800 of those, so that could be an issue. Our quick growth has also led us to scattered, loosely documented processes with diverse technology stacks and plenty of tribal knowledge. So in order to address some of these issues, we did start building out an internal developer platform, but we did still find that it took some teams up to 2 weeks just to create a hello world application on that platform.
And the point being around an internal development platform as a whole that we're all kind of working towards is that context is not obvious. There's so many moving bits. And so one of the key areas that we set out to was figure out how do we get that full service context? And there's a lot of foundational capabilities and enhancements that we would build around that. So this idea that context is usually not obvious, awkwardly worded intentionally there, but sometimes context is obvious, right? In fact, if we take a look at an example, you might see this particular seat, this particular toilet paper, and that particular hole. And you might realize we can pretty much gather the purpose, the intent, the reason why that chair is positioned over that hole. Seems like we can gather that context. But in our world of development, in our world of engineering, there are so many more details to context that go into it. Take a look at some of the architectural buildings that we have across the face of our planet. It's actually pretty interesting. This is an example here. You might say, well, what is the purpose of that building? Is that a residential home? Why is it designed, as this fortress, as this bunker? Well, in this particular case, you might have surmised it was to protect occupants from an apocalypse. Makes sense. Let's look at something maybe radically different towards this idea of this tower. Is this a lighthouse? What is the purpose of this tower? There's no water around. In reality, this is the drop tower in Bremen, and it was created specifically to drop things from a scientific perspective, to study the effects of weightlessness and terminal velocity. And so that makes a lot of sense now that we understand that. I think if you look across the planet, you'll find this kind of analogy applies across the board. And of course, bringing it back to this idea of developer experience, development platforms, you might also be asking yourself, what is the context that this brings to answer some of the questions that we have? We find that our developer portal brings context to us at a low level, at a team level, specific services, but also at a platform level. Here's an example where our goal was to enable ARM64 runtime support for core languages. We're a polyglot organization where we focus on Python, Java, C#, and Go. And we were looking to kind of connect some of the information, in our Kubernetes runtime with some of the primary language information that we see in GitHub. And to do that, we created a service catalog specifically inside our developer portal and port to kind of tell us some of that information and connect the dots between the two. And we quickly discovered that if we're going to enable ARM64 support, we need to understand how that will be impacted by our build process and our agents. And so specifically looking at our services by language in our service catalog, we understand that we have over 500 that are Python based. And that's going to be a problem because right now our build agents uh, are not prepared to build with emulation. They only build ARM64 through cross compilation, and Python doesn't support that easily. And so trying to understand then, can we have the true impact and the cost savings that we want when we have a majority of our services as Python? Some of our SRE team, specifically our friend Jesse here, took that one step further and then connected that over to some of the data on compute that was executing inside of our Kubernetes clusters. And by pairing the data together, he quickly realized that, well, we don't actually have a ton of Java services compared to Python. It actually runs most of our compute workload. So even just focusing on Java has a 75 to 80% coverage on the type of compute that we'd be saving money with. And of course, Java, .NET, other ecosystems support cross-compilation, so we can get them up and running quicker than we can with some of the Python support. Context like this is just one of several cases that we're developing now that is just impacting our ongoing roadmap for our platform. And I've referred to it a couple times, our developer portal. Internally, we've branded that as Dev Portal, the SPS Dev Portal. And we've begun that specifically by enabling several key data sources that impact our software development lifecycle. And for us, that means everything from our tech registry API, which is a custom implementation of a service catalog that now we're integrating into Dev Portal, along with Azure DevOps, which is our pipeline usage, along with GitHub, which is our repository usage, and how those functionally deploy out to AWS and to Kubernetes. And so we're able to take these concepts, pull them in easily, and integrate the data to build a fantastic foundational service context for our developer portal, which really is, defined for us as this definition here that is the location that individual developers, teams, and managers use to own, operate, and improve their software.
So kind of when we started down the journey of investigating, okay, we want to build a developer portal, we began to see a spectrum of options that we needed to consider. So on the one end, we had these rigid developer portal solutions. So the benefits of these were they were very quick to set up, and they tend to appeal to executives, but their inability to adapt to all our needs, we saw maybe hindering our long-term adoption and maybe our ability to develop for them. On the other end of the spectrum, we see unopinionated developer portals. So these have the flexibility that we like to meet our needs, but they generally required more significant investment to get set up, as well as increased maintenance costs and risks. So ultimately, we were looking for some type of balance, something that would offer some opinions as a place to get started, but be flexible in the long term to meet our unique and changing needs. So through the process, we kind of landed on a few key questions one has to consider when thinking about a developer portal. First one is, are we ready for a developer portal? So have you already taken some steps to centralize some of that context, some of that data? Maybe you're doing some type of tagging or categorization system. I know we did. The next thing to consider is, what is the size and skill set of your team? So is your team that's going to be implementing it front-end heavy, back-end heavy? What languages does your team like to work in? And how many developers can you devote to the project, and for how long can you devote them? And the final part was kind of how custom is your tool chain? So is your tool chain so custom that it won't fit into a rigid data model? Or are you using standard tools like, say, AWS and Azure pipelines, in which you'll get a lot out of the box with a lot of these providers? So some of the solutions we personally considered range from Backstage, which is the most popular self-hosted option, all the way through to Port. And ultimately, we landed on Port for a number of reasons. So number one, we really liked the flexibility of the data model using blueprints. And we wanted to spend more time focusing on getting the data we wanted into the portal than how it looked on the UI side. And finally, we really liked that we had the option to write a lot of the infrastructure or write a lot of the stuff for the portal as infrastructure as code. And we'll get into that a little later in the presentation.
One of the things that we were really excited about was trying to figure out what is the type of team, what is the right team structure, what does the ownership model look like for a developer portal? Where does that fit in amongst the offerings today of platform engineering and those models? And we quickly landed on the ideas around empathy-driven development. And for us, that was really this approach that we wanted to have engineers building our developer portal that could relate most of what they do to the development perspective, to the delivery teams that were there. And so we quickly pivoted a little bit in our approach to that. And in this particular case, we move the line of where some of our individual teams report to and how they work together. For us, that was important for this particular approach. And so this is all still under the premise of platform engineering as a whole, the way we model it, but through a matrix of teams where we have different verticals reporting to different VP levels. That just made a lot of sense. But they still work matrix style very well together. And this gave us a ton of benefits. If you're familiar with team topologies, you'll see kind of this referred to as your stream-aligned teams. That's our delivery teams. That's our development side. We also have platform teams, which is pretty obviously your typical ops style teams, AWS, teams, Kubernetes, SRE, cloud, all of those. And the reality is that developer productivity engineering for us really fits in well as an enabling team for the stream-aligned teams because they build that empathy and they understand what those teams are looking for in a much more holistic way. But we've modified this slightly for what team topology shows. And for us, that was kind of building this bridge and connecting our developer productivity teams also to our platform teams. And having them work very closely together was essential. And so we've seen just this breeding a ton of empathy between our engineers, understanding and feeling, the reasoning behind the scenes for some of the needs that are there, fosters further collaboration and breaks down some of those departmental barriers, and just all around encourages the ideas of inner source. And, the developer portal can be built, yes, by a dedicated team, but also can be encouraged and contributed to from an inner source, open communication, open collaboration style. We also struggled with balancing content a little bit and figuring out what is right to be inside our developer portal versus what belongs somewhere else, or maybe what isn't and shouldn't be added there. And for us, this was an important statement. The idea that our developer portal helps us manage tool sprawl in most cases, not necessarily eliminate it. And that was key because we have a ton of tools that do a niche job. We're not necessarily looking to completely replace their UI or remove that tool in most cases. We're just trying to bring together the context effectively for it. And so in terms of balancing content, number one is to link to existing tools instead of replicating their UIs. So as an example, we have Kubernetes dashboards, and they have a lot of power, a lot of capability in them. But we struggle to navigate to the right dashboard with the right configuration. And so our developer portal now connects those and gives you deep linking between the two. Another example is URLs. We use sumo logic, and sometimes getting to the right URL with the right time frame for your service is difficult. And so we can form those queries automatically for teams now, and they're able to very quickly go from developer portal as a starting place and get accessible locations to all the different links that they might need that are ready to go and deep linked. Prioritizing the integration of own data. This goes back to our foundational data I showed you earlier. We picked those data sets because they were foundational to our SDLC, but also because our teams and our ops side had already done a great amount of work to connect context across them all. And so we understood service ID and how service ID connected pipelines, repositories, cloud resources, Kubernetes deployments. All of those were well understood that we can take one service ID and connect them across the system. So you can see one view, for example, in port, that very quickly then describes, where is this thing deployed? How can I get to those resources, those dashboards, those logs very easily? And that made a lot of sense. But where you might have to balance it out is to say, well, what about some of the other unowned data sources? For us, our feature decision provider is an example of that. We use a lot of feature flags, but we haven't really matured enough to organize those feature flags effectively and understand ownership of them. And so no single person can go in and have a clear view of exactly which teams own which of the feature flags, which is a bad position to be in, especially around cleanup. But recognizing that, we knew we needed to solve it, and we can solve that with a developer portal, but recognize that now there's still some under the covers work to do to figure out, well, how do these projects map to different teams, a mapping that didn't exist before. And so that's important work to do, but we recognize that there's a significant amount of more effort that isn't a quick win in doing that kind of work. And of course, recognize that an internal developer portal is not a reporting platform. It's current state, minimal history, some trend stuff, some aggregations, which makes sense. But at the end of the day, if you're looking to do, analytical warehouse style aggregations over time for significant periods, this is probably not the right data store, not the right tool for you. And so you still need that separate. You still need the ability to analyze some of the data deeply from standard warehousing perspectives. And the developer portal, we agreed, probably isn't going to do that and shouldn't do that. And that was helpful, so we could use the right tool for the right job. So in a lot of these things, as we're figuring out what data to bring in, what not to bring in, how to balance that content, we did pilots, POCs, workshop ideas early for feedback. And that had a lot of opportunity for us then to make changes and pivot as we go.
All right, so next I'd like to get into some of the architectural decisions we made when we were building out our developer portal. So I'll tell you some of the benefits that we found and some of the challenges we experienced with each of those decisions. So first, we're going to look at the fact that we wanted to be able to follow our standard development lifecycle and be able to roll out changes for testing before making them available to users. So initially, we considered two different ways to do this. So the first way was to restrict views to in-progress changes through permissions. And the other way was to set up two instances of our dev portal, so a dev and a prod. So we're kind of thinking about restricting views to in-progress changes through permissions. The benefits would be that we would only need to manage one instance of our portal, which would definitely simplify things like, say, SSO. The problem that we ran into is that this only works for some entities. So ones like catalogs, dashboards, and actions can be hidden using permissions, but fundamental entities like blueprints, integrations cannot be disabled by permissions. And those things will affect the whole portal if something goes wrong. And so we did travel down the route of looking at setting up two instances of dev and prod. So the benefits we saw of that is, once again, like I said, this kind of follows the pattern that we are used to using on a daily basis as developers. And we can test system-wide changes and move quickly without worrying about the impact to users because we're in a dev environment. Now, that doesn't mean we were without problems. So the first problem we ran into was we don't have a dev instance of all the services we wanted to connect to. So take, for example, GitHub. So we only have one GitHub organization, which had all our repositories. And we didn't necessarily want to be doing write operations for testing in there. The second kind of example we ran into was with our internal service catalog. We did have a dev environment, but it didn't have the data that we needed in that environment, especially since it was so foundational to our portal. So the way we kind of got around this is that for GitHub, we decided to set up a dev instance. And so now we have an instance that we can kind of mess around with, do our testing, especially as we start creating self-service actions. For the service catalog, we went a little bit of a different route. So we actually just ended up pointing our dev instance of the portal to our production instance of our service catalog. Now, I will call out this is just a read-only relationship right now, so it runs minimal risk. Now, this has caused some issues. So for instance, our service catalog does have references to our production GitHub repos. And so this has caused some junk data to get into our dev instance of the portal, but that's just something we deal with. So the next issue that we ran into was that we don't have the same volume of data in dev. So this really came up for us with our AWS integration. So our AWS accounts, we tend to scope to environments or what we call infrastructure zones. So for our dev instance of the portal, we just loaded information from our dev instances of our AWS accounts, and that all worked fine. Now, when we rolled out to production and started loading information across all our environments into production, we started to run into issues just because of the volume of data. So the outcome from that one is that, well, there are just some things we can only test in production. So in that instance, we worked with Port to kind of figure out what was going on and resolve the issue. And the final kind of issue that we ran into was mostly for our team on DPE that was building out the actions and everything else in the portal, was that we couldn't really tell which portal we were logged into. So the issue with this is that both portals had the same URL and they had the same UI. So the only way to really differentiate which instance we were logged into was through the data. And another thing that was an issue was because of the same URL, we would often run into an issue where the session would get messed up. So you would start in one instance of the portal and you might refresh your page, and then all of a sudden you've jumped over to, say, the production instance. And that's not great if you're going in and you're manually updating data in the UI. So how we got around that one was we were able to create two different variations of our logo, the purple one being for our dev instance and the blue one being for our production instance. So by looking just up at the menu really quickly, at any time, you could tell which version you were on. The other way we got around it was we started using isolated web environments, either through incognito or just different browsers, in order to isolate the sessions so we wouldn't accidentally jump over to the wrong portal. So I would say overall, well, there have been some drawbacks to choosing to go with two environments. We've pretty much worked around most of the major hurdles and we've accepted the remaining challenges. We might still revisit some of those things, but it works for now. And overall, having that dev environment has been very beneficial because we've been able to iterate rapidly and detect bugs in data maps before they got rolled out into production and potentially affected the user experience.
Jim's already excited to see us using custom logos, I think. So that's a nice win for sure that has impacted us. Mark, I wanted to throw it on the other one related to environments as well, that we kind of default, I think, into this idea that, well, it's a dev portal, it needs to have context to everything in dev and prod that it's reaching out to. Or the same idea that in Azure pipelines, you have one instance because that one instance needs to deploy to everything or needs awareness of everything. And so I think our default status coming in was like, oh, we just need one dev portal. That's all we need. But quickly realizing that if we're going to, effectively develop and roll through changes to some of the points you made, we need to figure out a different approach to it.
Yeah, 100%. And kind of on the back of that, so as soon as we had settled on, we're doing two different environments, we knew we needed something to keep them as stable and predictable as possible. So obviously we started to consider using infrastructure as code. So we realized early on the two biggest things we needed to consider was risk and change frequency. When we were thinking about risk, the questions we were asking ourselves is, what is the impact on the system and the user's experience if something breaks? And how hard or difficult would it be to fix? And is there a risk of data loss? When we were thinking about change frequency, we were thinking about how often is something change? And when it changes, how quickly do we want to see those changes? So as we thought about the different resources we were bringing into the dev portal, we started to map them out on this quadrant. So thinking about models and integrations. So these are foundational to loading and mapping our data. So if these break, it will affect the user experience and it may require the reload of data. And so those are pretty much our high risk resources. Also, once we kind of design them and settle on them, they don't really change that often. There might be the odd update or removal of a property, but for the most part, they're pretty static. Actions, on the other hand, are not as foundational as the data models, but if an action is misconfigured, that would definitely negatively affect the user experience. And they do change a little more. So with our action development, we tended to start out, with kind of a bare minimum functionality for an action, roll it out, get usage, get feedback, and then expand the functionality. So they do change a little bit more than the models and integrations. On kind of the other end, we have scorecards. So these aren't really foundational, and they wouldn't really change that much because they are tied directly to models. But a misconfigured scorecard is also relatively easy to recover from. And then kind of in the bottom quadrant there, we have catalogs and dashboards. So these are built upon the foundation of the models, and we see them as being most frequently changed as users will update, filters, groups, depending on the data they want to see and what view they want to see it from. And in general, if they break, it's a pretty quick and easy fix to recover from. So at that time, we kind of made a decision and kind of drew our circle around that bottom quadrant. So if something was low risk, high change, then we were just not going to include it in our infrastructure as code. The other thing we were super mindful of as we were going through this process was not to repeat past mistakes. So for example, at one point, we thought it would be a great idea to codify our Grafana dashboards and have them in our repositories for each of our services. However, we found out in reality that having them in infrastructure as code just caused way too much friction. So, developers wanted to iterate quickly on changes, but little updates would have to be deployed to prod. So they'd have to go through the whole CI/CD pipeline. And so as a result, developers just stopped updating their Grafana dashboards and then they became outdated. And that wasn't something we wanted to repeat with the ports resources. The other thing we noticed was that as the frequency and risk are not really static variables. So for instance, as we started codifying our actions and models, we found that we obviously wanted to iterate pretty quickly, and especially when we were testing our JQ statements. So we kind of changed and pivoted a little bit because we realized that risk was low if we broke any resource that was not currently being used by users in production, and we wanted that high change frequency. And so what we started doing was building out and iterating directly in our development portal UI to shorten the iteration cycles. Now, we really like Port's robust UI for building out things like data models, mappings, and actions. And then what happens is once we were happy with the state of those, we would delete them from that environment. We'd codify them first, delete them from that environment, and then roll out to both environments through infrastructure as code.
And Mark, that goes back a little bit to the idea of balancing the content earlier, right? Where we want to iterate fast. And when you're rolling through infrastructure as code, it's hard to iterate that fast sometimes. And so seeing your team build these things in real time in the UI and actually play and manipulate as you're taking feedback really shortens those feedback loops, right? And then once you land on it, now you can move forward with it.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And then I think the last kind of major reason we decided to go for infrastructure as code is it enabled building an action framework. I'll get into a little bit more about that right now. So setting out and we were thinking about adoption and how we were going to get adoption of a portal, we realized that one of the number one things we could do was build out a suite of self-service actions. And we realized they need to be high quality and there needed to be a good number of them. However, our DPE team is a team of 3 developers, and we realized we couldn't, nor should we be writing and maintaining all of the self-service actions. So before we even started codifying our first action, we determined it would be a good investment of our time to create a framework that would handle 2 areas. So the first area would be the building, deployment, and execution of the actions, which we kind of considered infrastructure. And the second area would be the common functionality that all actions would need, which we kind of bucketed under the idea of business logic. So looking at the infrastructure, so our standards at SPS is to use Azure pipelines for CI/CD. So we decided to build some shared Azure pipelines templates. So we built a template that would handle deploying the action support, along with necessary resources like pipelines to run the action in each environment and parameter groups to share secrets. We also built another template that would handle most of the process for building, testing, and then publishing the code in Docker containers. So that's the next part that we chose to go with. So we did choose to go with Docker, and we did that to keep the business logic host agnostic. And so the run process just passes information to the Docker container as environment variables, and then the Docker container contains the code that runs the action. And one of the major reasons we chose to go with this is so that in the future, we could move that container to some other process, say like Lambda, and run it there instead of in an Azure pipeline. All we need to do is pass in the same environment variables to the container, and we can run the action wherever. So, and the final kind of decision to pull it all together was to use Pulumi for our infrastructure as code. We liked it because it had plugins for working with Port as well as Azure pipelines, and it also supported TypeScript, which is the language of choice for our team. When we were thinking about business logic, we had to consider the skill set of the teams we wanted to help build the actions. And so we settled on using TypeScript, like I mentioned, kind of our strong suit, as well as Python, which was really supported by our internal teams. And we built a suite of common functionality that would be needed for all actions. So this included getting and sending data to port, as well as error handling and logging. And to kind of tie it all up, we created a suite of documentation. So this documentation includes how-to guides and videos, auto-generated type documentation, and getting started pages, as well as a Slack support channel to help those who are developing in the dev portal. So the result of all this effort is that it only requires about 5 files simply to build, deploy, and run an action in the portal. So the first 4 configure the action for deployment and runtime. And the last file, or however many files you want, will contain the logic to do whatever you're trying to do for the action. But we also wanted to take it one step further as well. So the very first action we created in our dev portal was an action that would scaffold out an action. So the user just provides 7 pieces of information, and then we use Cookie Cutter to generate all the necessary files and create a pull request, which contains a hello world type action. So from there, the user can choose whether they want to just merge that PR and they can deploy it out and they have a fully functional action all the way to production, or they can choose to take that as the basis and start to configure it to whatever they need for their action. And the final point I want to talk about a little bit was how we approach the whole data modeling. So when we began to think about data models, we knew we wanted to design them in such a way that they were both scalable and maintainable. So one of the first sources of data we started integrating was from GitHub. So as we were thinking about the models in GitHub, we realized that here at SPS, we tend to bucket Dependabot and code scanning alerts kind of together as what we call vulnerabilities. And so we started to explore what a unified code vulnerability model would look like and the benefits and drawbacks of that. So we've been thinking through the benefits for it. It maps really well to the way we treat vulnerabilities here at SPS. We think about those as the same thing. Another benefit was that in the UI, we can view all the vulnerabilities in a single table or chart. And so that's great for filtering and searching. And the other benefit was, well, we're not maintaining 2 nearly identical models. So it really does simplify things. Now, from the drawbacks is that not every property maps well to a unified model. So take, for example, these code snippets. So a Dependabot vulnerability doesn't have the concept of a severity type. So they're all just marked as none in our map. So that can be a bit of a challenge, but however, we kind of found that's pretty easily mitigated because you can see we're bringing in these types here as well. So say we wanted a table or a chart that focused just on severity types, we could just filter out any type dependabot, and then we could go on from there. So it's relatively easy to get around. The next thing we started thinking about, especially with GitHub, was bringing in the repository model. And we started to think about the companies that we had acquired and might be acquiring in the future. So GitHub is our standard of how we do things here at SPS. All of our repos are in GitHub, but we may acquire other organizations that are using something like, say, GitLab, and we'd like to get those loaded into Dev Portal as well. So for this reason, we made a generic code repo model with a type that could handle data from other repository types. So some of the benefits of this was that by adding a new source, we would just require to add that integration and a mapping and not a new model. So that's about half the work. And it also really aligned well with kind of what we see as the spirit of a developer portal, which is bringing related data together and not keeping it separate. Now, the drawbacks for this is it may not work for everything. So for example, we have generic models as well for our pipeline projects, pipelines and pipeline runs. So if we're looking to bring in GitHub Actions, it would map well to pipelines and pipeline runs, but the pipeline project would essentially be a repository. Now, we already have the concept of repository. So what would we do? Would we map a GitHub repo to a pipeline project, or do we add a relationship from a repo to a pipeline? So this is something that we still have yet to address.
I love what you said, Mark, about the spirit of it, right? Is to bring these things together. If I got to go to Dev Portal for us and I got to see, here's your GitHub repos on this screen and here's your GitLab repos on this screen, like that's not accomplishing the end goal, right? Or even I know you and I were chatting a bit about automations and the ability to like, when there's an event, I don't want to add an automation, on a new GitHub and GitLab repo. Just when there's a new repo, code repo, just tell me about it. But I think like anything, some of the drawbacks you've described kind of lands us in the architectural zone of it depends for each model that you're looking at and kind of the purpose and the intent of it inside your organization.
Yeah, it's a good call. It does take more time up front to think through the different scenarios rather than just, maybe mindlessly adding just, okay, I got a GitHub repo, I'm going to add a GitHub model. Okay, I got a GitLab repo, I'm going to add a GitLab model. That doesn't take much thought because you just map the properties, whereas you need to kind of take the time to really think it through a little bit more with the generic models.
And like our case, you might discover in some cases that you thought you had a good model, and as it evolves over time, it goes, oh, wait a minute, this isn't necessarily working out with the relationships that we need.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to jump into some of our impact of our developer portal and show you a couple more screens of exactly, some of the data that our teams are able to see and use for different goals and initiatives and campaigns. This first one is focused on the idea of a migration for CI/CD agents, and we are migrating to a new improved security and performance platform where our CI/CD agents for Azure DevOps will exist, and we need to migrate hundreds of pipelines. You can see in the background there are some numbers. We have over 3,000 pipelines. 1,400 of them are still, in midst of being migrated. And we have no other better way in the past of really seeing and understanding which individual teams still need to migrate and how. In the past, it's been done manually for these types of initiatives where teams get Jira tickets and the ticket, had the listing of all the like this service, this service, this service. It's not a real-time view. It doesn't get updated automatically. Port does. Our developer portal now does give a real-time view for teams, showing them here's your specific services you have to update. We still have those Jira tickets, but now there's just a link to the dev portal dashboard that says, here's the work you need to finish. And most importantly, at a platform engineering level, we have dashboards as well that show us the overall progress on that particular initiative. Similar initiative would be Helm chart upgrades. We really like to move fast with our Kubernetes versions, and unblocking Kubernetes cluster upgrades is a necessity in order to do so. And so we have a centralized Helm chart that we call default chart that our teams need to migrate through and use the latest and greatest versions. And we have to deprecate them because they are connected to some deprecated APIs in different Kube versions as well. So with the same approach to our CI/CD migration, we're now able to enable that visibility directly for some of our teams. Additionally, I talked earlier about kind of like balancing, content and like what do you bring in, what do you eliminate, those kind of things. In this particular case, we felt like the tools and the capability inside Port was actually enough for us to look at consolidation of API design, first process and tooling in some cases. And so we can bring in our open API specs directly aligned to some of our service catalogs. We can build an API catalog. We can offer full context. And we can include other information that's specific to us around compliance and governance and visibility. We can see our open API specs across different environments now that are codified and custom to us and how we think about them. And we're getting, again, that platform level view and understanding, who's linting these specs, what is the duration of that linting, what kind of warnings and errors are coming up. And we have a centralized catalog now in our developer portal for everyone to be able to see that information at any granularity, which is fantastic. So talking about being able to save some money that we can also invest back into Port and to Dev Portal as well to continue its enhancements. And thirdly, transparency to inaccessible data. I talked about our feature decision provider earlier and some of our feature flags. We have a number of members, especially managers and operations and on-call, that all needed access to see the feature decision provider information, but they don't really toggle it. They don't need to do any of the actions associated to it necessarily. They just need the visibility to it. And so we can begin to import that data, not just streamline it for ownership, but also provide some very compelling views of information towards it. In fact, we can create some very customized views that help us understand, our feature flag status and how those flags are inactive or active over time, and really encourage teams to help clean up and use effective feature flagging maintenance approaches. And so that has been huge. We don't need to necessarily license those, couple individuals, those few individuals that, just need read access. And now everyone by default has read access to that information where needed. So we can save a ton of cash there, again, to reinvest back into some of our initiatives. And so with that, excited to be able to share today about Dev Portal and its foundation on Port. And we'd love to connect with you as well. So I'm going to reach out to us on LinkedIn, and we'd love to hear what's working, what's not working, and continue to share some notes.
Yeah, Travis and Mark, that was fantastic. Really appreciate you joining us today to share. I think there's something in the air because I talked to multiple teams who are migrating either CI/CD or migrating repo providers. Maybe that's just confirmation bias or recency bias, but nonetheless, I think it's probably a normal thing that people go through on a regular basis. But to see how you built that out in Port and sort of track that initiative and see the real-time sort of status of things, I think is incredible. The whole architecture you built around self-service actions, I think is very impressive. It's very, sort of mature end of the curve, I think, in this world of developer experience in general and in the usage of Port, I think specifically too. So really great to have you sharing what you've built and sharing your experiences. And yeah, encourage folks to reach out and make those connections with Mark and Travis. They're also in our community Slack, and you can of course find their information here and connect with them. And hopefully you get to go see them live and in person if they're in a city near you soon. And appreciate it. We'll wrap things up here, which is a couple more notes. Get over to my screen. So as I mentioned, Travis and Mark are taking their show on the road. They'll be in Boston and Denver, in Clearwater, and they've got some CFPs out for a few other locations as well. And we're hoping to run portal talks again from Port, perhaps late in the summer or in this fall. And I have a strong suspicion that we would have Travis and Mark as one of our featured guests there. But do encourage you to go and check out those sessions. If you're there live, meet with them and chat with them. It'd be great. Again, if you want to see all the release notes and keep up with the latest and greatest on Port, our changelog is publicly available, as well as our public roadmap. You can go in there, you can see what features, you can upvote features, you can add your own requests to that public roadmap as well, and just kind of see what's out there. But we want your feedback and we want your input on those things. Port will be at KubeCon in London next week. So if you're in London for KubeCon, we'd love for you to stop by the booth and say hello and chat with the team that's there. We'll also be, I think it's at the exact same facility, but back in London at the end of April for AWS Summit. Another great show. So hope to see everybody at one or maybe both of those shows. But really appreciate everybody joining us today. And we will see you all. Double check here and see. I didn't see any unanswered questions before. I think we're good. Yep. So again, thanks everybody for joining. Thanks again, Travis and Mark, for presenting and sharing your experiences with us today. And we will see everybody in the Port Slack community and the session next month. Thanks, everyone.